welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a wrap-up video. I feel like I haven't done one in a while, and I feel like I have a lot of graphic novels in this wrap-up. I've been reading a ton of graphic novels lately for whatever reason, but I kind of feel like I haven't really read like any really standout books. Like I haven't had any of those moments where I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this book is everything, and I'm kind of waiting for like that first book this year where I'm just like obsessed with it, and it just hasn't happened yet. I feel like I've read a lot of like decent books, but none of them are just like those standout reads, and I'm just waiting for that, you know, 5-star standout read. So the first book that I read since my last wrap-up video was Heartstopper Volume 3. So as you guys know, in my last wrap-up videos I read the Heartstopper 1 and 2 graphic novels, and those were both 5 stars. But with this one, this is Volume 3, I wasn't as big of a fan of Volume 3 as I was with the other ones. Now, it's not that it was bad, it was still cute. It was still cute like the other ones. But with this one, I kind of got this feeling that it was a little bit forced. I kind of felt like the author was really trying to pander to her audience a little bit with this one. Like, I kind of felt like she was taking struggles of the teen age range, and she was trying to put as many of those struggles into this graphic novel as she possibly could to try to grab the kids in this age range. I think she put in a little bit of self-harm, she put in a little bit of eating disorders, she put in a little bit of like there was just so much teen struggle crammed into this book, but it wasn't done in a way where she was trying to use it to help, or she wasn't trying to use it to like, you know, bring awareness or anything to these subjects. She was almost using it to like pander to a crowd, and in that way I kind of felt frustrated reading it and kind of annoyed reading it, because I was like, I mean, if you're gonna bring that up, don't bring it up so passively. Like, that's kind of a big thing. Like, she just kind of flippantly mentions it and then just kind of acts like, but they're over it now. You know what I mean? And it's just, it's not realistic, and I feel like if you're gonna put those type of hard subjects in a book, to do it justice and don't just act like it's nothing. And I kind of felt like that is what she did with this. So in that regard, I gave it 3 stars, because I did kind of find myself rolling my eyes a couple of times with some of the topics, and yeah, it was just kind of bothersome, but 3 stars, but still cute. So the next book I read obviously was House of Sky and Breath, but I'm not going to talk about that in this video. I did a whole video about that. It's like a whole reading vlog on it. In the reading vlog though, I think I gave it 5 stars, but after pondering and kind of coming down from that post-book high, I decided to only give that book 4 stars, because I felt like the pacing was just a little bit off throughout that story. Like, even though I loved it and I loved that ending, I felt like I was kind of like coerced into giving it 5 stars because of that ending. But after thinking about it for a while, I was like, like, I definitely got bored at parts. It was definitely some slow parts. And I felt like with Bryce and Hunt, I really wanted to feel like these really strong feelings between them, and I just didn't. Like, I was kind of annoyed with Bryce and Hunt, but because my feelings for them just weren't as strong as I wanted them to be, I definitely moved my rating down to 4 stars. It was still a great book, but it's definitely not a 5-star read for me, like I thought it was. So the next book I read was When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. So this is a book about a brain surgeon who really wrestles with the idea of death, like his entire life. He has a really hard time coming to terms with death and purpose and what it means to die and what it means to have like meaning and give your life meaning. And his whole life he's just pondering that question so much. And in that process he becomes a brain surgeon, and he really does feel like his life has a purpose. And he really does have to deal a lot with death every single day, you know, talking to families about death. But then one day he gets diagnosed with lung cancer? It was lung cancer. And he has to kind of face his own mortality in this, and his process of doing that, and his process of like going through cancer treatments. And, you know, it's just such an interesting story, because I feel like it's very natural for us to ponder death and ponder meaning and purpose and all that kind of thing. And I feel like when you're a logical person and a scientific person like he is, it's really hard to really fully process death and like what that means. And I feel like this book was so fascinating, especially for people that do ponder that question a lot. and it was just a really, really fascinating read, seeing, you know, that process told through a doctor's eyes. This is a very hard-hitting, very thought-provoking read. It's definitely heavier, so, you know, read this when you're kind of in the mood for something like that, but I feel like everybody should read this. It is such a good read. I feel like I'll definitely reread this in the future. I highlighted so many passages in this book because there's so many highlightable quotes in this, and it's just a fantastic read. I knew I was gonna like this the second I picked it up. I gave this 5 stars, and it's just a worth it read. Okay, so the next actually 2 books that I picked up were books that I borrowed from my sister-in-law, and she let me borrow these. She goes, they're really, really kind of like fun, quick reads. She said that she read them really, really fast, and she told me that I should read them. And I ended up picking these up pretty quickly because if you guys remember from my wrap-up video, I believe it was, my yearly wrap-up, one of my goals was to read more horror, and I knew that these were horror, so I was like, you know what? Now's my time. So I picked them up, plus I was kind of in the mood for just something short and quick and like lighthearted. So the first one I read was House of Shadows by Darcy Coates. Now, I've never heard of Darcy Coates before, and I've never heard anybody talk about her before. It was the first time I'd ever heard of this specific author. So what's interesting about this book is it's definitely not like a fantastically written novel by any stretch of the imagination. It's definitely kind of cheesy a little bit, but there's something like compulsively readable about it, and if you embrace the cheese, then it's totally enjoyable. And so while I was reading this, I was like, okay, Kara, like this is kind of corny, but like it's kind of fun at the same time, so just like enjoy it. It was like that type of book. It's one of those books that's extremely fast-paced. Like, she's not wasting any time getting started. She wants you to just jump right into the story right away, which I really appreciate sometimes. Like I said, if I'm feeling kind of slumpy or I just got out of like a really big, long fantasy novel, sometimes I want something that just gets to the point and it's not overly driven by details, and this book is definitely like that. And it's definitely like kind of an old school style of writing. Like, if you really like that damsel in distress type of romance where the girl like gets into trouble and then the man comes to save her and then something else happens and then he just happens to be there and he saves her and he's like so in love with her. Like, it's that type of story where it's like that really guilty pleasure romance type of vibes. So if you're into that, you'll probably like this as well. But it's a little insta-lovey, but I feel like sometimes if you can just accept the insta-love, then you can be fine with it. Like, it's just one of those books you have to accept going in, but it can be super enjoyable if you do, because it is just so fast-paced and just kind of fun. So this book is about this girl who comes from a family that lost all of their wealth, and to get, you know, her family out of this pickle, she has to marry this really, really wealthy man, and he's going to, you know, obviously pay for her and give her family money. So she marries him, and he takes her to this house, and this house is haunted, basically, and there's this curse on this family and on this house, and she gets kind of sucked into this whole problem by marrying this man, and there's monsters, it's paranormal, there's ghosts, and all sorts of different things, and it's just a fun read, honestly. I gave this book 4 stars. I mean, I easily could have given it 3 because of the cheesiness quality of it, but like, I can't deny the fact that it was kind of enjoyable. But then, oh sorry, I was holding up the wrong one. So this is House of Shadows, the first one. This is House of Secrets. This was the second one, and it follows the same couple, but this one was like 3 stars. It was honestly kind of boring. It was kind of the same storyline to a certain degree, but like also kind of different. But it was just not as fun. It wasn't as fast-paced. It wasn't as enjoyable. There was just something about this one that was just kind of like, okay, like I feel like I just read this story, like I don't need to read it again. And I kind of just was like a little bit more bored with this one, and I feel like it was just kept going and going and going and going, and I was just kind of bored of the characters. I would definitely recommend this one, but like I could skip this one, you know what I mean? So that's kind of what I would do if I were you. So I gave this one 3 stars. Wasn't the greatest, wasn't the worst, but I definitely would recommend this one if you're kind of like in the mood for something like fun and like kind of spooky. So the next book that I read was the book that I was so excited to read. Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey. You guys know that I'm obsessed with It Happened One Summer. It's my favorite contemporary romance. This is the second book in the series, and it did not disappoint. It did not disappoint. Now, I still have to say I much prefer It Happened One Summer because I just like the tropes that she used. I just like kind of the dynamic between the couple. This couple wasn't bad. It is Fox and Hannah, and they're cute, but the only downside to Fox and Hannah is she definitely leaned into the miscommunication or like bad communication trope where they just don't really want to talk to each other about their feelings ever. And like Fox is going through all of this inner turmoil and Hannah's going through all of this inner turmoil, but they never really like talk it out and like really hash out their feelings. And that really kind of gets on my nerves, especially when they're constantly questioning each other's feelings for each other. But I still love the setting. I love that Brendan and Piper kind of made an appearance every once in a while. But it's just not some of my favorite tropes in this one. I mean, obviously some people really like kind of like that hard to get, very like mutual pining throughout the entire story. Some people really love that, but for me, it's just not something I super connect with. I definitely like better communication in my books. I still gave this book 4 stars. Like I said, it was still good and I still really enjoyed reading it, but I still like It Happened One Summer just a little bit better. So 4 stars for hook, line, and sinker. So the next book that I picked up was Lore Olympus by Rachel Smythe. So this is a web graphic novel, and I could definitely just like go read it online, but I'm just waiting for like the second like actual physical copy to come out. Now, when I first started reading this, I was like, like I don't know if I love this. Like it definitely has some weird, confusing timeline swaps, and at first I thought I had a misprint. Like I had to go online and ask in one of my like reading groups on Facebook. I'm like, do I have a misprint? Because something's not making sense here. But apparently it's just how she wrote it. She like wanted it to be confusing. I don't know. So at first I was kind of like, I'm not sure if I like this, but after reading this entire graphic novel, I couldn't help but admit that it was just a fun little quirky cute read. It's Hades and Persephone, typical, but it's definitely more like modern times, like in the modern day, kind of like Touch of Darkness in a way. And Persephone's like super innocent in this, and Hades is kind of like totally misunderstood. And it's just like your basic Hades and Persephone's trope, and I couldn't help but just enjoy this by the end. And I was like, I want to read more. Like I wish I had the second one in my hand so I could just like start the second one, you know? And I can't help but say this was cute. I gave it 5 stars because I enjoyed reading it. The art, to be honest, isn't my favorite. I definitely don't prefer that really simplistic, very stylized type of art in my graphic novels. I much prefer a more detailed style. I know it takes longer for the artist, but it's just a style that I prefer. I liked it. I gave it 5 stars. So the next book that I read was Sex Cult Nun by Faith Jones. So I actually listened to the audiobook because I prefer my nonfiction in audio form. It's just how I like to read my nonfiction. So whenever I read nonfiction, it's probably going to be audio. But this is a memoir about Faith Jones, the girl who wrote this. She is the granddaughter of the man who basically founded the Children of God cult. If you don't know anything about the Children of God, I would definitely recommend reading this one first. I mean, there's a lot of information on it, and I feel like she covered pretty much everything that you need to know about the Children of God. And to me, cults are one of the most fascinating things to learn about because I absolutely love the psychology behind how people join cults, how people leave cults, how people agree to do just the abhorrent practices that these cults like try to get their, you know, followers to do. It's so interesting to me that people hand over their lives to these people that are just crazy. Because this specific cult was very much into like the free love movement of like the 70s, and it definitely leaned into that like culture, but while also being extremely religious. It was basically saying that the way to spread God's love was through sex, and it encouraged women to flirty fish, which basically meant to go out and have sex with men and bring them back to the cult, so they'd want to be in the cult and try to like persuade them to come into the cult by going out and sleeping with them. And so that's how people, you know, joined the cult, was the women went out and flirty fished. You know, the men had multiple wives, they taught kids, you know, sexual practices at an extremely young age. They tried to teach everybody, and kids especially, that sex was not taboo and that it's supernatural, but like natural in a way where it's like everybody should be doing it at any age with anybody. And that caused just a lot of obvious bad situations and bad things to happen within the cult. And basically it's about this girl who was raised in the cult. Obviously her grandfather started it, and kind of how she escaped, how she realized that the cult was just ran by a perverted old man. Like this is like the whole story of the cult, and it's just really fascinating. So if you like to learn like the ins and outs and every single aspect of them, then this book is for you. But if you only like very specific things, this may not be, because it's a very like long drawn out story. So I personally gave this book 4 stars. There's definitely really dark, graphic, and triggering content in this. There's a lot of child abuse, a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of like rape topics and stuff like that. So be very wary going into books like these because they aren't always like really fun to read by any means, but it's more so just to learn and to understand. Good book in my opinion, but I can understand how people may not like it quite as much as me. So the next book that I picked up was Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This is V.E. Schwab's most recent release, and when I saw this cover, I needed to have it. And there's a new bookstore that actually opened up in my hometown where my parents live, and I was so excited to go there. And this is the book that I decided to buy while I was there, and I was really excited to read it. I thought that the cover looked really pretty and it just intrigued me. And when I opened it up, it actually looks very middle grade in the way that it's kind of formatted. So there's actually like illustrations and stuff in here, which I didn't realize until I picked it up and looked at it in person, but there's a lot of illustrations and paintings. And but one thing that I can say is this actually is YA. I think the main character in this is like 15, but she does not feel 15. This book feels extremely middle grade. I feel like the main character should be like 12. The entire time I read this book, I was picturing the main character as like a 12-year-old girl, like my daughter's age. And one thing that I really noticed about this was the Neil Gaiman inspiration. She had to have gotten some sort of inspiration from Neil Gaiman, which is totally fine. I mean, Neil Gaiman is an amazing writer, but I definitely saw ties between things like Ocean at the End of the Lane and this book. I felt like not only were the vibes very similar, but I saw some very specific things maybe pulled from it, and it just gave me Ocean at the End of the Lane vibes, like 110%, which isn't a bad thing. I liked that book a lot. That was one of my favorite books I read a couple of years ago, but this definitely screams Neil Gaiman. But there was something about this book, as beautiful as it was, V.E. Schwab's writing I love. I love how she uses metaphors. I think she is just she's really good at saying what she means in very little words and saying what she means in metaphors. Sometimes I feel like some authors are really bad with metaphors because they just don't get what they're trying to get across, but V.E. Schwab is really good at them. And it's just like her strength as an author. But there was something about this book that was really missing for me. I got super, super bored with this book. I'm not gonna lie. Like, as short as it is and as quick as it is to read, I definitely just felt like I was ready for it to be over. I don't know why that is, because the book and the story was interesting and I was interested in it, but I was just kind of bored at the same time, which that always sucks when you're reading a book and you're just kind of like bored with it and you're just kind of like, okay, like I'm kind of ready for this to be over. So that kind of sucks. And the other thing that I really, really, really was upset about with this book is the conflict isn't resolved. And it's okay if there's like a little bit of an open ending, like I'm kind of okay with that. But with this, the conflict that was originally present at the beginning of the story and kind of the conflict that you're trying to resolve through the whole thing is still there kind of at the end. Like it didn't get fully resolved. And that really, really irked me because it kind of makes it feel like you read a book, but it was like pointless to read it because like the conflict is still present. And when I got finished with it, I just felt like it was incomplete. Yeah, so this book I gave 3 stars, but I kind of feel like at one point it was like a high 3, almost 4, and then other parts it was like a lower 3. So I'm gonna say this is like middle 3, maybe middle to low 3. Just not my favorite book ever. Elena might really like this in a couple of years. It just feels like a younger, whimsical, like young teen story. So the last book that I read was Orochi. This is by Kazuo Umez, and this is a graphic novel, and this screams Junji Ito. Like, if I wouldn't have known that somebody else wrote this, I would have 100% thought it was Junji Ito. It's the same style of art, and it's horror manga, so it kind of has that same feel as Junji Ito, which, like I said, it's not a bad thing to take inspiration from people, but I feel like it's almost like spot on, if that makes sense. So I ended up giving this 2 stars. I was very, very just kind of disappointed in this. I don't know, I mentioned this in my review on Goodreads. I don't know if it's horror manga that I don't like or if it's the authors that I'm reading, because I find that the concepts of horror manga are usually really, really interesting, but they come across as shallow and corny and cheesy because they're not being explored enough. And so these really deep topics just come across as like shallow. They feel like skeletons of a story to a certain degree. And the other thing too is Orochi is like just like Tomi. And I got the same exact feelings from Orochi as I did with Tomi. You don't know who she is. You don't know why she's doing what she's doing. You don't even really understand what her powers are. You have no idea what her motivations are. And by the end you're like, who the heck is this Orochi character? Like I feel like she's like a key character and like he wrote all these stories about her, but like I don't even understand like who she is. Like what the heck is she? And that's how I feel. I don't even know if she's good or bad, to be honest. Like I couldn't even tell if she's a good character or a bad character. So I really wasn't a fan of this. I thought some of the stories had different interesting concepts, but they just weren't like explored enough. So I was just kind of like, okay. I mentioned in my Goodreads review the onomatopoeias. I can't stand when those are overly used in books, in graphic novels, like pow, bang, and like, you know, all like the sound effects. He overused those things so much in this book. It was so frustrating to me because I feel like onomatopoeias can come across as super cheesy, especially if they're weird noises. Like, it's one thing to put H for like a scream, but when you do like NGHUZ for like pushing something, you're like, I don't know, like the onomatopoeias in here were way too overdone and irritating to me and just too much, and it just made the story even cheesier than it already was. So beautiful, but just not that good. So if you're not a fan of Junji Ito, I wouldn't recommend this. If you really like Junji Ito, then definitely check this out because you might really like it because it feels very similar to Junji Ito. Yeah, I gave that 2 stars, just wasn't the best. So yeah, I feel like my reading cycle this time around just wasn't that great, and I just really want to find a book that's just really good, that just makes me really excited. A book that's like, oh, this is like a brand new favorite of mine. Like, I don't have any gold stars yet this year. I had 4 gold stars last year, and I have yet to read a gold star book. I read a couple 5 stars, but no gold stars yet. So hopefully I can find a really good book soon, and I can rave about something to you guys. But anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye.